just here making the adjustment that's necessary to keep moving forward in the world of art
Yeah,
and keeping a positive spin on it all. And I'm taking advantage of this time and I'm growing faster than I ever have. So
man.
it's really good, actually.
Yeah, I'm jealous. It took me a minute to catch a groove, but I'm I'm getting there, man, getting there. And so I appreciate you, man. I appreciate all the stuff that you're doing. So like, what are you working on right now?
Well, I would start by saying one of the things that's happened for me during this period is I've gained an even deeper appreciation for art. I realize that every day I wake up and I have something that I'm passionate about. I get up and I'm ready to work. There's something that's on my mind that's helping me stay challenged. And it's really just discovering the beautiful science of organized sound. And then I realized there are a lot of people in the world who don't have a passion like that. And when you're going through a quarantine, I can't imagine what it would be like to wake up and not have something that I'm dreaming about, that I'm really passionate about getting to every day. So it's not about being on stage for me right now. Of course, we all miss being on stage, but I'm getting so much out of learning about music and the things that I'm working on. I'm just really grateful, humbled by the significance of art, and appreciative that I've been blessed with the opportunity to be a student of this music.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's heavy. That's a really great point, and it's something that a lot of us, I get up and I'm excited when I walk in front of my instrument or when I think about a new project. And for me now, and I know you have kids too. We were just talking about that, but I love seeing the growth of my kids with all this time. Like, not much to do. Eventually, they make their way to an instrument.
Right, right.
Especially my 6-year-old.
Yeah, it's been great. I actually started giving my 7-year-old piano lessons, taught him to play a song or two on the vibes, things that I didn't really have as much time to
Right.
do before. And it's really great. So again, there's challenges with all of that. We all know the challenges that lie ahead. And actually there's plenty that we don't know
Yeah.
yet. But I think part of the gift that we've all been given as musicians, particularly around jazz and improvisation, is we spent most of our life learning how to listen and adjust to unpredictable circumstances. So in many ways, we're more comfortable with the craziness that's going on. We're going to figure something out one way or the other. And I
Yeah.
don't know that things will ever return back to exactly the way they were before, nor do I think it's necessary to
Right.
do that. This is a part of evolution, and it's a matter of, do you have vision and do you have the drive to figure out what the world needs next, and then to utilize your own passion, your own talent to be of service to the world.
Yeah. And yeah, and to be able to share that too. It's that's a thing where people talk about going back to something. You know what I mean? I can appreciate the sentiment of going back to. I want to go back to be a teenager and try that stuff again, but I'm not trying to go back. You know what I mean? Like
Right, right,
I want Tupac back. All
right,
those types
right.
of things. But at the same time, like, we are where we are. So it's what can we do? The sooner that we accept that there's going to be massive changes and adjustments, even after we're able to, be more functional again, I guess. How are we going to be able to leverage this? How are we going to be able to, be in a crowd of half the amounts of people, or where are we going to perform? Where are going to performance spaces going to be? But that's as soon as we accept, to go through the acceptance process and we can start to grow. But all the
Yeah.
looking backwards, right? So I know you're working on a lot of really cool curriculum stuff. Just working on, you're going to be at Rutgers,
Yes, at Rutgers,
right?
Newark. Yeah,
Right.
Newark, New Jersey. So
Because you have some cool
basically,
opportunities there that are pretty neat, kind of wide open, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I look back at what I've been doing over the past few decades. And I've been performing. I've been giving talks on music, talks on leadership. I've been working on algorithms for apps and teaching and running a college program and making records.
Right.
So I've kind of been
Really good
all.
records, mind you.
Oh, thank
Really
you.
good records.
But it's put me in a position where I'm utilizing my talents and abilities in a myriad of ways that need to be focused towards a common mission. And so for me, going to Rutgers University in Newark is serving as an opportunity for me to build a platform that creates a centralized ideal of how I'm going to utilize all these seemingly disparate things that I'm doing. so that I can really be more impactful. So I want to be more focused. So I'm basically taking all the information in my brain, and in many ways, I'm dumping it into software right now.
Right.
Because once I have all of those elements in software, I can then write books. I can then create multiple apps around music theory, around ear training, around improvisation. But first, I have to get it out of my head first, get it on paper, and then get it into software. And one of the reasons I love working in software is software has no intuition. So there are all these things that you and I do as musicians, right? You play a chord, something about it doesn't quite feel right, and you just make a change. The software won't make that change. Right. So it's forcing me to really deeply understand why things work and why they don't work in a way that in the past, you know, I'd study and then I just feel something. I don't know why it works, but it feels good, therefore I'm going to use that. But I can't do that in software. And so working in software has actually made me a much better educator because I'm able to answer really some seemingly mundane questions that I wouldn't have been able to answer before.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, man. I never thought of it that way. And, you know, speaking of like the way that you think and feel about music, you know, if you go back, your undergrad, right? Go, you know, not that far back. You're not too far removed, I guess. We're all pretty relatively young. If you go back, your undergrad was not in jazz. Am I correct with that?
No. My undergraduate degree is in classical music and classical percussion.
So I didn't really. How did you switch? Why did you switch? Was it hard?
I mean, I didn't grow up playing jazz, but my mother's a minister, so I grew up in the Black church. So I grew up hearing soulful music from the heart that was infused with beautiful emotion and narratives that were connected to the realities of what was happening in the community. So I learned very early on the purpose of art, that art is there to be of service, to amplify the emotional content, be a release for what people are going through in life. So I sort of saw that. Of course, I heard Stevie Wonder and all that kind of music coming up. But then I got exposed to classical music very early on, and it just really was fantastic for me. One of the things I loved about classical music is it forced me to discover parts of myself that may not have been as useful given the environment that I was growing up in.
Right.
Right? Like we all have to behave and maneuver in certain ways to handle the circumstances that we're surrounded by. But when you start to delve into art and music and you try to recreate something, you end up pulling on parts of yourself. Like I remember really loving Mozart when I was a kid, when I first started to play some of that music, because I had to learn to pull on a certain kind of fire, but do it in a way that was gentle. Right? And it was like, it's such a strange juxtaposition. I was always a fiery person, but then to learn how to really present that fire in an elegant way was really transformative for me. I mean, there's lots of things I've learned from classical music, but that was one of the early lessons. I learned a lot about phrasing from the church, the idea of people standing up to testify and happened to use a couple of notes along the way. Right. But the phrasing came from the way that they communicated. And so I took that, brought that to my approach to classical music. So all of that, I can't say that classical music was my foundation. I think Black culture was my foundation. And then when I got to college and people asked me about the transition, on the one hand, and I did play some jazz in high school, right? We had a small combo and we played some tunes and stuff, so it wasn't completely foreign to me.
Right.
But when I got to college, the idea that I was starting from scratch is not really accurate. I may not have known the modes. I may not have been able to voice chords, or I didn't know the tunes or Charlie Parker records, but I knew the culture because I grew up in it.
Right.
I knew what it meant to improvise. I knew what it meant to play with rhythm and with feeling. So the transition, it was more of a homecoming for me.
Right. And so but I guess just from the actual logistics, I mean, you brought up some beautiful stuff, like you raised in the culture. So I mean, that's what a lot of people end up having to learn about, you know what I mean, afterward on the back end, which is interesting, you know, and a whole nother conversation for another time. But what about like just getting into, you know, and where did you go to school for your master's?
For my undergrad, I was at Manhattan School. I started at Eastman, transferred to Manhattan School, and then I stayed at Manhattan School for my graduate degree as well.
And then you switched over to jazz. So I mean, but in terms of just, you spent 4 years or however many years it took you to get it, but was aggressively classical, just learning lit, learning ink, a lot of big ensemble playing, and then now what were some of the challenges and just kind of switching over? I mean, I'm sure you weren't starting from scratch, but
No, I mean, well, it's gradual. So I was a classical major, but I was in college with people like Eric Harlan and Jason Moran and Myron Walden, Eric Lewis. I mean, like really brilliant musicians. So Eric Lewis was one of my best friends. And I remember him taking me to the CD store. We used to have those things back in the day.
FYE.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And telling me what CDs to buy. And I remember Eric sitting at the piano showing me certain voicings. And so while I was a classical major, I was definitely hanging out with the jazz students,
Right.
asking lots of questions and carving out time to practice along the way. I mean, I think by the time I was a junior in my undergraduate degree, I understood that I was going to move on to focus on jazz. And I was writing music ever since I was a child. And when I look back at my writing, it's not so different than the music I wrote on the grand unification theory. When I was in 6th grade, I was writing songs with multiple forms and, C sections and all this stuff, but I didn't know what that was. So even though you may not have called that music jazz, the essence of who I am is, I don't know, I think it's always been there. And it's just what happens as we study over the years is we become increasingly more articulate. But what you're articulating doesn't really change that much.
You become more articulate, but what you're articulating doesn't really change that much. I'm going to let that marinate for a bit, actually.
We have to accept ourselves.
Right. There's wow, you keep dropping things that I want to talk about, but if we go tangential on this, it's going to end up being a several hour conversation, which we've had, but not right now.
Right.
Yeah. So you were at MalletLab, which is the camp that we hold down in Florida every year. This year it's digital, but last year, and you gave a clinic that I am not ashamed of saying that I cried at. Like I cried, and it was a beautiful clinic. And you work with a young man, and he had a heavy marching band culture, which is great. But number one, you didn't say a regular a word out of the English language in the common lexicon of English for the entire clinic until the end. And you mostly just spoke in kind of gibberish, scat-ish. You started with that communication, and it was over an hour of a clinic, and you had this young man come up, and just to give a little context, I'm going to show this video. You had this young man come up, and he was a little rigid from all of his marching band. He never improvised, and he was super brave and bold, and it was really cool of him. But you kind of got him talking with the instrument, and I'm going to kind of pick it up at a moment where he kind of reverted back to kind of some of his marching band ways. And you said something here, and I just want to dissect what you mean a little bit, because I agree, but I just want to see where you're at. So this is a little clip of that.
Right, so I have lots of big picture dreams. My most fundamental dream is all about empathy.
And that is the wrong clip. So we'll go to the actual clip, which happens sometimes.
Right, so I have lots of
works. Push forward to about right here. And so it's that part right there. He's playing. He was going along, and then you said, "You're turning into a percussionist. You got to preach. You got to tell the story." So when you say that, what exactly are you inferring by that?
I mean, it's the whole idea of where rhythm comes from, like why we phrase the way that we phrase. There's no 16th notes in music. Those are abstract representations of something so much more organic. The way that we phrase comes from the way that we communicate. And these are lessons that I learned growing up in the Black church. You can't just go daga 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 daga. You have to say, I woke up this morning and I'm feeling good. Do da da da. And there's all this beautiful nuance, accents. There's a cello rondo, and all this stuff happens when we communicate every day. And so the goal with music is for the mechanics of music to be in service of articulating that which is organic for you. So what happens is
repeat that one more time. Repeat that just one more time. The mechanic. One more time.
I'm not sure I can.
I don't know if you can. The mechanics of music are there to be in service of that which is organic for you.
Yes.
All right.
The role of the mechanics of music are to be of service to help articulate that which is organic to you. So what happens is many people focus on mastering the mechanics, as do I. It's vital. It's important to do. But then people lead with that. They lead with execution of the mechanics. But that's not what other human beings identify with. 95% of your audience in the future is most likely are not musicians, and they don't know about the mechanics of music, and they don't care, frankly, but they know about love. They know about fear. They know compassion. They know all those emotions. So if what we're doing is taking our fingers and simply articulating this energy right here, because this is what I feel like in this moment. If I push that through my instrument, basically I'm pushing something that lots of people can relate to. And they see themselves, they hear themselves reflected in the art that we create that way. So that's part of our service, is that we're unlocking something in masses of people who may not have the tools to unlock that in themselves. Particularly, and it's not always about suffering. Sometimes it's just giving joy a platform. But a lot of times people who are going through things and they don't have a platform to express it, if it stays inside of you, it festers and it becomes a sickness. It could be physical sickness, spiritual sickness, emotional. So we unlock pathways for people. But if you're going to stand up and you're just going to go in a way that people can't understand and relate to, that's just execution of the mechanics, and it's mastery of craft. But ultimately, an artist is so much deeper than the craft.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And and that does, when you talk about just being a percussionist and being down that line, that usually, when we think about our, being a percussionist, a lot of it is execution of rudiments. A lot of it is execution of properly timed rudiments. And, and especially when you get into the marching arts, I mean, it's all about, that is the art. You know what I mean? How perfect can you line up, and how can you line up physics front to back? And there's that place for it. But when especially in a situation like this, and this was that was what was so beautiful about that particular student and that particular moment.
And its thing is, it's not that those types of rhythms and those types of rudiments are wrong. It's just they were designed to articulate a certain energy of organization, of regiment. Right. And for people who are marching together in the service, right? I mean, it makes sense that it's highly organized and it's perfectly executed. But the way that people outside of the service, the way that our lives operate, there's a lot more ebb and flow. It's a lot more organic. I mean, you look at Beyonce's performance at Coachella, and you look at a bunch of the Black college marching bands, and the way that the rhythm feels when they're playing some of those same rudiments, you can tell that those rhythms are not in service of perfect marching execution. Those rhythms are in service of making people want to dance. So they have a little bit more lilt, a little bit more swing. So you got to be clear, what is the purpose? What is the point of you playing those notes? So when I hear someone play and I can't hear them talking and I can't feel some type of emotion from them, then I don't know, I feel like it's just, I can get a computer to do that.
Right.
I can't get a computer to tell your individual story, not yet.
And what do you think it takes to get to that point? I mean, especially because academia as a whole doesn't embrace that. They'll talk about it, but it almost feels like it's on the back end. So the idea, are we, if all the time when we're playing in front of people who are telling us what we're doing wrong, and or we're playing in front of other colleagues who are looking at us in this learned environment, how then do we bridge the gap between that culture and then all of a sudden you're out in the world and people are like, well, you're playing too mechanic, or you're playing too this. And it's like, I'm just trying not to make mistakes. That's all I've done the past 5 years. So how do we start there? How can that be changed in academia?
So it comes down to culture, as you mentioned. It's really about why does the institution exist? What is it trying to do? Most conservatories have came into existence in the United States because they were trying to populate symphony orchestras. I mean, fundamentally.
Right.
So you're training people to learn excerpts so that they can win the audition and join the Chicago Symphony. But in terms of creating a generation of artists who are going to tell the truth about the world in which they inhabit, that's a different challenge altogether. That's actually an issue of culture, right? So when you look at the culture of improvisers and you look at blues musicians, for example, in the United States, African Americans, if you go back to the idea of a griot in Africa, these are people who use music to tell stories, to pass on the history. So they had history collected, they had unbelievable memories in their heads. When we came to the United States, we actually were stripped of our history. So the difference between someone who is a griot, who's carrying a history with them, and a blues man is the blues man is a great observer. The blues man walks from town to town and is just playing music about what he or she sees, right? But that was the purpose, that was the value, that they carried life experiences of their own with them because you were cut off from a lot of your history. Right. So that cultural foundation is a different one than the idea of trying to populate a symphony orchestra. It's neither is better or worse. It just depends on what society needs at a given moment. And I feel like right now, in large part due to the tech revolution that's happening in our species, the world has gotten so much smaller. You have different types of people from everywhere who are now living together who don't understand each other. I think what society is looking for right now is a way to hear and understand others around us. Some people are looking to isolate, but for the most part, we're curious about one another, which means you need an artist who can capture the feeling, the spirit, the food, the clothing of a people and articulate it through art so that others can perceive it and be a part of it. That's a completely different ambition than again, populating orchestras. Not better, not worse, just different.
Yeah, and I think that's, and it kind of goes back, and everything you're saying is tying so well together in terms of that, and people being able to see themselves in your music and your art, and that's really where the success is going to. That's really where success has come from. I mean,
the irony is when you look at just because we're talking about conservatories, which are primarily focused on classical music, when you look at the classical music icons, they did exactly what it is I'm talking about. I mean. Yeah. They captured the sound of their era, of what was happening in their world.
I mean, so we still call the whole era by that type of music oftentimes, like romantic era. This was the,
exactly.
And that kind of leads me in, you kind of touched on it, and but it kind of leads me into basically the next.
Right, so I have lots of big picture dreams. My most fundamental dream is all about empathy. When I look at what I'm trying to do with my time on the planet, I have a big chart that's going to carry me through, hopefully for the rest of my life. And at the top of my chart, it says, dedicated to the proliferation of empathy through the arts. So empathy to me is all about the science of understanding. Empathy is not good or bad, right? It doesn't have judgment. Empathy simply says that I walk into a room and it has nothing to do with me. I can see what's going on. I'm here, I'm an observer. I can, it's not about feeling sad, that's sympathy, right? That's another level, comes after empathy. The first thing that we have to do is be able to perceive the world in which we exist. So as a musician, as an educator, my primary function is all about empathy. And the direct translation, the direct correlation to empathy would be ear training.
So that last phrase specifically, when you talk about the direct correlation to empathy would be ear training, could you just kind of expound on that and some of the work that you're doing on that and have done, and Harmony Cloud, which is awesome?
Oh, thank you. Well, years ago, I thought about quitting. I was touring, I could play tunes, I had a successful career, but I just felt that for me to be away from home, missing my wife, and I just felt like music had to mean more to me than just having the ability to execute songs effectively. So I stopped for a little while and started to contemplate, you know, if it were the end of my life, what would I look back on and say I did? And would I be proud of that? And when I thought of the idea that at the end of my life, I'm going to say, oh, I was a great vibraphonist, that just didn't work for me. So I started to dream off of the bandstand. And I started to say, well, what impact do I think I can help with, that I think I can contribute in this world? And like I mentioned a moment ago, I think we're struggling with, especially in the United States, is the ability to quiet our ego and to listen and recognize other people before we make an assessment. It doesn't mean that everyone is good. It doesn't mean that everyone is bad. There's no judgment, as I said in the clip. So when I look at how that plays out in music, fundamentally, before you play a single note when you're improvising, you have to be very clear in understanding that your note is always relative to the people around you. It's always relative to what other people are playing. There's nothing that you could play that is inherently beautiful. It only has to do with the effect that it creates in relationship to other people. So before you play something that is intended to be beautiful, you have to first have the ear and the empathy to understand the context. So then when you understand what's happening around you, you understand that, oh no, I have to actually play down here in terms of the volume. And then everything's gonna sit and I'm gonna help lock everything together. But I can't do that if I just lead with my idea. So for me to become a better artist, to become a better human being, it's all about ear training. So when I started to refocus and rediscover, I shouldn't say rediscover, but to discover my real deep passion for music, it was centered around the idea of ear training and understanding first. If I couldn't hear it, what was the point of being able to play it mechanically?
Man, and you know, man, there was so much there. You know, my buddy and a piano player I work with a long time, Gianni Bianchini.
Oh, he's great, man. He's a gifted musician, for sure.
Yeah, he's killing. But he's the one who was like, man, did Stefon talk? And this is when I didn't know you very well, and I maybe only had one or two experiences with you. But he said, did he talk about like, yeah, this is the romantic chord, or this chord feels like the way you taught when you were teaching, I guess, when he was up in New York. You were teaching some classes
at NYU.
It was at NYU, and he said that that's the way you would think about it. And he said no one else was talking about that.
Yeah, I don't know. It just made sense to me. But again, it harkens.
I thought you were going to the piano for a second. Were you just about to go to the piano? I don't want to stop you if you're going to go to the piano.
Oh, maybe if it comes up and it's an appropriate moment. But all of that to me harkens back to culture. It's one of the great assets that I think specifically African American culture has to offer to all of us, is that idea of quieting the ego, getting a real good sense of what the environment is and how do I fit here? How is it that I can contribute? Where is there a problem? And with limited resources, how can I create with what I have available to me? Right. And I think again about even the situation we're in right now with quarantine and what's happening to our field. My mindset is that of an improviser because that's been my culture. The resources are limited, but there's all types of things we can create. Mm-hmm. We're going to make the adjustment. The thing is, and I was talking to my students at Manhattan School about this. The reality is people's desire for music has not changed. It's not that people don't want to listen to music. People want to be connected. The only challenge that's in front of us is a question of platforms. Of course, we can figure that out. I don't have all the answers. Now, if all of a sudden people lost interest for connectivity, for communicating with one another, for compassion, we'd be in trouble at that point. But that's not what's happening right now.
Right.
So I see all of that as part of that's a cultural thing, that what I'd like to do as an educator and with the work that I'm going to be doing at Rutgers University in Newark is really around reimagining what a college curriculum and a high school curriculum could look like in the arts. And I'd like to build an empathy-based curriculum. That's not about an empty vessel approach where you know nothing, I know everything, I'm going to dump a bunch of information in your head. I've been working for years to create a system in which you have to stumble and find all the answers. Now, I know all the answers. I got them all written down for the whole semester, right? But instead of me saying this, and this, go memorize this, I created a process for people to go through where they make lots and lots of mistakes. And when they come back to class the next week, it's always, well, why doesn't that work? I don't know. Let's try to figure it out. And along the way, I think people develop a deep emotional and spiritual relationship with sound that way, as opposed to just memorizing things. So that's what I'm hoping to do. And again, those are cultural aspects that I hope to infuse into American arts education.
Man, do you have an age limit on those who can apply for that class? Oh man, that just brings joy to my heart, man. Just hearing that, hearing the idea that, because I mean that's the way we do everything, right? It's the way we learn English. It's the way we learn to ride a bike. I mean, you balance this way, you sort of figure it out, and once you figure out that rule, you don't forget, and it's very similar. Like,
and you find out what works for you. That's the big difference.
Right. And you have what, two kids, right?
2 kids.
2. I have 2 as well. One's a lot older, and it was funny because I was ready when I was teaching my 6-year-old how to ride her bicycle a couple weeks ago. I was expecting unknowingly expecting the same experience as I had with my older one, and this one just happened. My older one's very cerebral, needs to practice, doesn't want anyone looking, needs to figure it out, tell her, lay it out. This one was just like, let go, just okay. And it was a completely different thing. And this one's okay with falling and getting, but the other one just wants to be perfect, all the time. And it's the same way especially when it comes to music. I didn't come about my playing. You just mentioned the fact that you were in classical training for 4 years at one of the top classical schools.
Right.
This is where your path has led. So.
But again, it's not that anyone's. I mean, we're learning the mechanics of music. We're learning the physics of music. But what we're articulating, we already have when we were little kids. I mean, it's almost like my goal is to give people permission to use multiple parts of their brain to understand music. You don't only need to understand it theoretically, right? So you think about a kid, they hear a chord when they're 5 years old and they say, I don't like that chord. That chord is scary. Right. So already they're storing information about how to categorize that chord so that they can distinguish it from other sounds. So I think every sound in Western harmony can be categorized according to how you feel emotionally, actually according to how you feel physically when you hear the sound, because organized sound actually creates different physical emotions, physical reactions. Like there's some sounds that make your body tighten up. There's some sounds that just completely open up, like a sound like this. Oh my goodness. It's funny, like physically, if you try to go like this and put your hands flat, it feels terrible. You try to go.
Right.
Right.
Better like that.
Right. So a lot of times the way that I'm writing music, or if I'm on the bandstand, I hear a sound, it's more like I feel it more than I hear it. Like it just feels like, oh, it opens up. It's just a big, massive chord like this one. It's just, and because the way that I identify with it is this physical and emotional relationship, that's what I choose to play. So it's not that I play the right notes. This is a sharp 9, sharp 5. You can play an altered scale or whatever, but that's not what I'm thinking. I'm playing this. So the dynamics, the phrasing, the note choice, all of that is relative to articulating the feeling that is innate to that sound itself. But it's a very different mindset. And I'm a theory nerd. I absolutely love the science of music. But if I had to choose between you could read music and you were a theory expert versus you didn't know any of that, but you could feel, hands down, I'd rather feel music.
Right. Right, man. I mean, and it's funny too because you talk about you'll start that way, and then when you get into it, you start talking about upper structure triads and what notes work. I mean, it's not like, because sometimes when people talk in with the energy you're talking about, I would say, right? It's sometimes you can feel as though that's to sort of it's either to say this instead of that, or it's to say, yeah, you don't need that, or it's to diminish the quality of that. But then you'll talk like this, and then you'll sit here and throw down the headiest stuff, that there is. You'll talk about these upper structure triads, and here's the choices, and here's why you use those choices, and here's the reason why this progression works to this progression, works to this one, and why the way we've been thinking about the circle of fifths and the circle of fourths,
you need both. They inform
Right.
each other, just like real life. I mean,
Right.
I remember just being younger, and one lesson I had to learn over the years was the balance between logic and emotion, right? Because I was actually a pretty cold, logical person. I still tend to lead with a lot of logic, but I realized over the years that my logic was falling short at times if I didn't have the passion. So it's almost like I have logic to come up with the idea, but then I need the emotional passion to actually put in the work, right? To so that I can actually execute that idea. And when I look at what we're talking about now, this idea of these feelings, and yeah, you can have the feelings, but then you need to be able to recreate them, which means you need to spend time studying the mechanics of music.
So Harmony Cloud that leads me right there. It's in its first phase, like it's
Yes. So Harmony Cloud is an app that I created based on the need to, it's hard to describe. I was teaching at NYU, and I would work on chords with students, and the students would say to me, well, how do I practice this? And I said, well, you have to get together with other musicians, and you're a community. But basically, I'd be at the piano playing chords for them, challenging them to hear what it is. And after a while, I said, that's not good enough for me as an educator, for me to just say, oh, you got to practice with other people. And so we eventually started to look into the idea of creating an app that actually could generate challenging musical harmony so that people could learn to play by ear. So Harmony Cloud, what's on the market right now, it's just on the Apple platform. But if you go to the Apple App Store and put in Harmony Cloud, it'll come up. It's basically an algorithm where you can put any triad, any major, minor, all 12 major, minor, augmented, diminished, sus, and it's going to improvise a progression that is musical, not random, right? It's actually unpredictable, but very musical. So if you say, well, I can't really hear that well, you could literally say, well, I want to start off with just being able to hear this compared to this, compared to this. You can start off with just 3 sounds, and the app will do things like this. It'll do inversions. Right? And so you can say, oh, that's a C, that's an F, that's a G. And then eventually you can say, okay, I'm ready to add A minor. Then you can say, I want to add E minor, and one by one. Right now, with the update that I'm working on.
It keeps on putting them in ways and inversions that are musical, but not the same every time. It's not like you're just looping.
No, it's unpredictable. Right now, with the update that I'm working on, that should be out by January, there are over 60,000 different movements that this thing will do. So the current version is sort of a beta version, and it has all triads, which is really hard. Right?
Yeah, it's really hard. I haven't yet done I take the challenges, but I haven't put it out there yet. So.
But the one that's coming out now will have sharp 9s and flat 13s, and it literally can make progressions like this, like. It does all of that kind of stuff. And the idea is that you start simply, you go to your instrument, whatever it is that you're playing, and you say, all right, I'm going to just learn to play by ear with these 2 chords, then 3 chords, then 5 chords, then 50 chords. And you can do it in categories. I like to recommend, from a theoretical standpoint, if someone is trying to learn how to play a sharp 9 chord, you could actually just put in all 12 sharp 9 chords, and the app will musically put together progressions that use those sharp 9 chords.
Wow.
So there's all types of things.
That's available in the one now, right?
Well, no, not with the sharp 9s. That's right. The one that's what's coming next.
But man, I find so much value in what, it's funny because I remember when I first got it, I was like, oh, I'm going to add this, root position, first position, relative minor, parallel minor. Yeah, okay, I love all that stuff. And then I started going through it, and I think I had changed the tempo yet, and I was like, okay, let me back it up a second. C major, 1, 4, 5. we'll do it like that. And what's interesting about that, though, is how many things I didn't think worked before,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or I would never think to use.
Yep.
Especially because you end up playing some pop gig with a pop person. I'm like, hey, solo over this. And, you know, it's 4 chords. Like, 4 chords. I can't come up with anything. But when you do it, like, there's ideas that I was like, oh, that actually works if I do this, you know, and you hear that and you get the opportunity to train your ear to hear things you would never hear. And you even have their suggested ideas for those tension notes too. And
yeah, so when a chord is played, you get on the staff, you get 3 notes that are basically resolution tones. So if it's a C major triad, you'll get a C, E, and a G. But then it'll start to introduce tension notes that'll be in red. So you start to realize if I play an F, that's going to be a red note, and I have to play that with a little bit more weight because it emotionally has a little more weight, like this. Right? Then you start to learn the feeling of La, of the A. The feeling of Re, which is more relaxed, the D. And the feeling of the major 7. Right? The feeling of the flat 6. So it's great because you actually can put a chord on and you can hit there's an ear, you hit the ear, right, and the chord will just sustain. It'll just sort of do a drone, and then you can get used to, like, what does the flat 6 sound like? And then what I like to have people do is not a chord progression initially. Here's one sound. Can you create emotion? Like if it's just sustaining this, can you...
I'm gonna put on a clip, if you don't mind, of your kind of that same clinic you gave last year at MalletLab, and it was when you.
So
Yeah,
that's an example of how I use Harmony Cloud. And what you're hearing is what's on the market right now. Those are
right.
just triads. But what I do is I just started with a C triad, and I just practiced as it was doing the very first thing that happened before the chord started moving.
Right.
I just practiced not even trying to make music, but just trying to articulate the feeling. And eventually the melodies start to make themselves. And once I did the C chord, then I worked on the F chord by itself. Then I worked on the G, and then I put the three of them together. So every chord that's playing, I don't know what's coming next. I'm playing by ear in that video, but I've spent weeks on every single chord that's happening, so that when there are times where I might make a face or something, I'm basically showing the students that even before I play the note, I know what it feels like, right? So it's not luck, and it is so much work. I'm not the most talented person. I always tell people that, man, like I couldn't hear very well in college. I was horrible at ear training, but I'm really good at understanding the value of mastering simple things and really thoroughly understanding something. I'm not there's that whole inch deep, mile wide debate.
Oh, right.
Yeah, like I don't need to know 1,000 things. I mean, I could learn 5 things, and my goal is to make as much beauty as possible with those 5 things.
I didn't know that was a debate. I thought that was just wrong.
Well,
I wasn't aware.
It's an interesting thing because I think it's a part of my philosophy as an educator is I actually want to share some of the cultural challenges of dealing with scarcity of opportunity, scarcity of resources, because that's when a lot of people's real creativity thrives. If I give you all the answers and you just play back what I give you, you're not going to discover anything. So I like the idea of saying, well, here's a sound. Before we talk about scales and modes, I don't know, you got to figure this out. Let me hear what you can find, what you like, what you don't like. Let's talk through it. And let's see if some of the ideas you're talking about, we can make them work. I don't know. It may be totally different than what I would think. And then we reverse map from there to figure out the underlying concepts, the scales and modes that justify what it is that you're hearing.
Right.
You should feel free to discover in music.
Yeah. And it's funny because I sent you a video a while back. I think my daughter was she's 15 now. I think she was 8. So it was like 7 or 8 years ago. And I sent you this video, and it was of her playing all her thirds and sevenths through the F blues, pretty much, rhythmically doing some stuff with them. And it was cool. And I was so proud. I couldn't wait to send it to you too. And you're like, that's cool. And you're like, but how's her swing? Like, help her learn her swing. Like, she got all her life to learn thirds and sevenths. And I was like, and I was like, yeah, you're right. She's going to get theoried out her whole life if she chooses to follow this, but give her a quadrant or a pentatonic or a major blues scale, whatever it is that she can handle, and let her find a voice and a rhythm and the articulation and be able to communicate on that control set. That changed the way I taught both of my kids, and even more so with my other young one, because right now she's 6 and she's so impetuous and she's so in all the best ways, and I'm trying to just make sure she has a great relationship with music, that when she needs to go and, just play, that she can just go and sit down and just, play and just be able to express whatever I can tell when she's angry and she's playing. I can tell when she's feeling good and she's playing, and that right now is the point. So I even never, all the way down to the point where I never try to say, don't play, even if I'm on a call or I'm doing something else. It's like, not a good time for it. Let's pick a better time for it. Let's make a better choice. Let's make is that the best volume you can play? Is that the prettiest sound you can be making right now? What do you think? And that's the challenge for me, but it's enjoyable. But all because of that one conversation of me sending you that video of that made me start down the way of how their relationship will be with the swing, with the music by itself,
And, being a parent trying to teach our kids, oh, man, it's a whole other thing. I look at it the way I use music with my kids. It's much more of lessons and perseverance. There's so many skills that they learn in classrooms where you can get the right answer and then you're done. Whereas with music, there's always something that you can do to get deeper, to make a different type of expression. So I actually use it in order to teach them how to push themselves without a border. You know what I mean? So it's whether they become musicians or not is not really the point for me. My 7-year-old, he really likes music, but that's up to him. I don't think you can push a child into music. But if he wants to be a scientist or whatever, having exposure to the idea of sitting still, using your ear, trying to create beauty, trying to imagine, that's going to inform whatever field of study you choose.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. I'm Stefon Harris.
Man, it's always good to hang with you, man.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, you've been influential to me ever since Cloud of Red Dust.
Oh, man, I appreciate it, man. I love you, man. You're such a brilliant human being, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you in the years to come, man. We got some good projects we've been talking about that we're going to get ready for the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, we were in this conversation. I know I tend to like to stay, sometimes it comes off as abstract, but there's no escaping the mechanics, as you were alluding to. The idea of working on just a couple of fingers, I'm a madman in terms of, like, last week there was one day I spent 11 hours working on one chord, trying to understand one chord.
What chord was it? You got to tell us.
It was a diminish. It was trying to understand how a diminish 11, no, this one, that kind of sound, trying to figure out how does it function, where does it want to resolve, how do you get to it, finding all the interesting movements that it does. And so it was one of those things, and I took notes, and so there's no shortcut. It's not like you just feel it. You wake up and one day it's there. No, it's like the harder you pick at the mechanics, it opens up your ability to perceive. So you need both. You can't just take the mechanics and then execute it. The point of learning the mechanics is so that you can let go and see the world around you and help other people see that world.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Man, I appreciate you taking this time. Just like you said, you spent 11 hours on one chord, and there's a lot more chords than that. So I know your time is valuable. You're a husband and a father, and you're doing amazing things. And I'm privileged to be able to. You're one of my mentors, and more importantly, you're my friend, man. And I really appreciate you taking this time.
All right, man. I really appreciate you, brother. Be well. All right.
Yeah, man. You too, buddy.